Welcome to Small Town Snarks. I'm Joel.
And I'm Miranda. Let's get snarky. So for Alice, you had mentioned to me in the past that your first full run through was opening night. How
yes.
did that feel?
Yeah, it was kind of like this running thing just in high school in general. And I can't say that it was unique to my first year, but I think the previous years, we had definitely gotten to a point where we were doing run throughs earlier.
Yeah.
But I do remember with Alice in Wonderland specifically that it was, the night before that we were finally able to do that full run through. And just thinking about it from my current experience, that stresses me out. And
Yeah.
I just trying to tell, trying to wrangle that many people into doing a show and getting them to tell their story pretty quickly and like making sure that it's adaptable. And, it's a lot of moving pieces, and it's a lot of moving pieces now. So I can understand to some extent that like that's a lot to have to wrangle. And I just could not imagine being in that position right now of trying to tell a story and like feeling that rush to try and get everything finalized there in the final minutes. But that is true from what I can remember, and that, like I said, was not unique to that show in particular. But
Well, we've been doing this for quite some time at this point, and usually the first run through is not very good.
Right.
It's pretty rough.
Uh-huh.
So I just can't imagine the stress that went with that. And if something goes wrong, you're like, well, we don't have time to fix it. So we are in it.
Yeah, I think what was nice, though, and, fortunately for that show in particular, it was kind of like its own individual series of plot points. So, like, we were able to uniquely work on each plot point. It was just the sewing them all together at the end. I think the timing of all of that and trying to make sure everything happened was kind of where things struggled a little bit. But I have positive memories from it, and it grew over time. I feel like we were able to tell that story effectively, and just a little frantic there at the end, but we made it happen. So,
Good.
Which, in theater, we always say the show must go on. So
Yeah.
it happened.
People come and buy tickets regardless of if you're ready
Exactly.
or not. So.
Exactly. And you want to make sure you're giving them their money's worth. And
Yeah, for sure.
we made that happen. So.
Are we ready to talk about Anything Goes?
Oh my gosh, are we ever ready to talk about Anything Goes?
So this was the first show we did together in high
Yes.
school, which was very exciting. One of my earliest memories is, so we did the auditions. First of all, the company that you get the scripts for, I know this drives you crazy too, but they only give you your part.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
You
I don't
can't
think
read
that
the
company's
full
in business
show.
anymore, but yes, I remember that vividly.
So you only get your part, which is crazy. But my mom went in after school one day, and our drama teacher was sitting at her desk, which at the time was like in the corner by the drama door, not up where it is now. And, my mom said, hey, let me know if you need any help with costumes. I'm happy to help. And that turned into she was running costumes for the next 7 years. Because me and then my brother. But so much of that ended up being custom made. That's also when I started going into the costume loft on a regular basis, and I've basically been moving costumes around ever since because I continue to move them around for STS. But one of the other things I remember with this show, and this was a reoccurring theme throughout our high school experience, I wonder how you feel about it. They always tried to do unique programs.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And I have mine still. I'll post a picture on Instagram. But some of them were so hard to read.
Oh,
So, like, Anything Goes, the program was a ship ticket.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. And I found it the other day. And it was, like, tied together with a piece of, like, string. And there were so many pages. So I'll have to send a picture to you. But
Yeah, please do.
I just thought that was an interesting thing to be passionate about is your program.
They did. I do have distinct memories from most of my high school shows, or most of our shows, that they had unique programs. And like one of them, wasn't one of them a newspaper, if I remember correctly? I feel like there was a newspaper one.
Was that James and the Giant Peach?
Oh, it might have been.
Yeah.
That's right. We'll get there. Yeah, the only thing I really remember from Anything Goes was, well, actually two things. My brother came in to help build the set, and it was
Yes.
this immaculate 2-level ship. I mean, it was
Yeah.
a ship, and it looked
It looked so
spectacular.
good.
It turned
Yeah.
out really, really well. And that set kind of lived on in perpetuity for 4 shows, I believe.
Yes,
it
2
made it
years.
through 4
Yep.
shows. And it, it was so many different things that we can talk about. But I remember him coming in and being a part of that process, which was really special to have us like back in the same space where we had kind of started out our
Yeah.
theater experience together.
Didn't he do the house speech too before the show?
I think he did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he did. So that was a really good experience. The other thing that I'll never forget is I am a stickler, you know this about me, in reference to presenting material the way that it's written.
Yep.
I think scripts are written for an audience, and they're written the way that they're written very intentionally. And I remember with the Anything Goes script specifically, I was Elijah J. Whitney, which for anyone who doesn't know is a drunk. I mean,
Yep.
he drinks for 3/4 of the show. And I remember, first off, having no idea what that meant and how to portray that.
Right.
So it wasn't until the final show that I was given a bottle to walk around with on stage.
Oh.
So that experience was super funny, just trying to pretend that I'm drunk and not look like I'm just, having some sort of emergency
Medical
on stage. Yes. So that experience, and then also, the stickler for the line delivery. I remember I had a line that was, where the hell are my glasses? I think is what it was. And I remember being asked if I wanted to change that to where the heck are my glasses or something like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't want to change it at all. This is the way that this is written, and this is written this way very intentionally, and that's the way it needs to go. And I remember just kind of putting up that fight. It wasn't a big drawn out thing, but I just remember that being, for someone who was in the 10th grade, I'm like, I'm standing by this. This is a
Right.
decision that we're making, and it's happening. So
I'm putting my foot down.
I'm putting my foot down about this line, right? So yeah, I mean, Anything Goes was quite the show. It was quite the show.
Which I just love how they were worried about that and not the fact that the show is racist.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that show.
It's rough.
we had a series of musicals that were definitely not. They should have come with a warning that they were of a different time,
100%.
and the conversations in them have since. I know Anything Goes has changed recently. I believe the content has been updated a little bit,
I believe so.
but that's just such a harsh and critical show, for sure.
It is.
from
The
that
music
standpoint.
is great,
Oh,
but
yeah.
I also think it's very likely that our drama teacher didn't read the script before she chose the show and then was in it at that point.
Mm-hmm.
She kind of had a history of going with whatever was recommended to her.
Mm-hmm.
So once we were in it, but some of that, I mean, having white dudes play Asian people is a little rough now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would say at the time it was also very questionable, but I
100%.
think for us at the time it wasn't even something that clicked in our mind as being problematic. But
We were also kids.
right? Exactly,
We didn't know.
exactly. And I mean, doing shows at this point, it's something that we're just very cognizant of, and making sure that
Yeah.
we're presenting stories accurately and intentionally from that standpoint. So
Yeah.
it's crazy to think about that show being, that was over 10 years ago now. Just
I know.
well over 10 years ago now. It's just crazy.
We don't need to give a date.
I know, but it just kind of just pops up in my head sometimes.
Yeah.
It's just time flies, but
Yeah.
yeah.
And then our play that year was 12th Night.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm going to be honest, I don't have a lot of memories from this show.
I don't either. I think for me, the only thing I remember was I auditioned. I remember the auditions being, I feel like we had to deliver a Shakespeare monologue.
Yes.
I feel like that was the situation there. And I remember delivering my monologue and not really doing super well with it. It was, I still to this day, I appreciate Shakespeare. I don't seek opportunities to read or present Shakespeare because it doesn't
It's not your cup of tea.
it's not my cup of tea, right? So, but I remember delivering that monologue and then the cast list going up, and I got the very short written character of Valentine, who had about 3 lines at the very beginning of the show. And I remember getting that. And then on the same day, I also received an offer to assistant stage manage, which I don't know what message that was sending as to whether or not it was a, hey, this is the role you're going to get, or hey, this is an opportunity. I just remember I took Valentine because that was, I was an actor at that time. That was what I enjoyed doing. And I liked being backstage and on stage telling stories and being with my friends. And, that was just the opportunity that I was looking for and wanted. But yeah, I remember that pretty vividly. And again, that was another one of those shows that was presented on our 2-story set. And just not a whole lot of memories from it. I know a lot of people felt very passionate about it, and it was a show that they really loved. So
I do remember sitting on the drama floor with my mom. There was a group of us, and we were cutting out costume patterns. And I know this is one of our drama teacher's favorite sayings, but I believe this is the first time I heard it. I must have said something that was perceived as stupid, and she was like, "You're so pretty." And I remember that was the first of many times. So that was definitely like, it's still, I'm getting a little angry just thinking about it. But yeah, that was a thing that she would like to say. And I remember even at the time, and I was a freshman, so I was already very sassy. I'm kind of always been sassy. It's just who I am. But I was just like, I am helping you right now. You want to basically call me names. So that was interesting. But one of my favorite memories from 12th night in general, like looking back on it, is just, it was the first time I got to see Dakota perform. So that was super exciting. And he was amazing, obviously. Yes. But yeah, I remember he just, and we'll get more into this when we interview him.
Yeah.
But he just kind of showed up and like killed it. So that was a lot of fun. But I was in the ensemble for that show, and I had this little toy, and it was like a ball and cup game.
Oh, yes.
And I would just sit there
the ball and the cup.
and play with it the whole time. That was all I did.
I like to say that, moving through as a company, we still have several ball and cup games.
We sure do.
And they make a regular appearance. So any of you who are our regular audience members may have seen them. But they are a prop favorite for Victorian era shows. So, yeah.
I also think that's one of the examples of, we've learned quite a bit on not casting people just to cast them and making sure that our ensemble has active things to do.
Yes.
And that was just like the perfect example of, like, I was literally just sitting there playing with this thing the whole time.
And that's what you did.
That's what I did,
your character
That was
did.
my job, and I did it.
Job was ball in a cup.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh, yeah. It was just one of those shows that I feel like, I appreciate it more as an adult who has more of a theater experience and more theater as a background versus when I was younger and wasn't as interested in Shakespeare or really understood Shakespeare as much. So, yeah.
Yeah. It was a choice. I mean, it was, of all like the Shakespeare shows, I think it was a good choice for high school. 12th Night is a pretty good one. But yeah, I mean, someday I'd love to revisit that show and not just sit there playing with a ball and a cup.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So I guess that was sophomore year for you, or freshman year for you?
That was freshman year for me.
Freshman year for you, okay. Yeah. So I guess sophomore year would have been, was that How to Succeed? Was that?
How to Succeed and Sweeney Todd, the play.
Oh, yes. Oh, we started with the play that year,
We did.
Right? Yes. Oh my goodness.
And I have some good stories from that one.
I do too, yes, yeah.
Do you want to start?
I would love to start. Yeah, so we found out we were doing Sweeney Todd, the play, which, for those of you who are listening who don't know, Sweeney Todd, there is a play version of Sweeney Todd.
The boring version of Sweeney Todd.
It is very, very similar to the musical that everyone knows and loves. And I mean, it's based off the same source material. Yes. However, it definitely is a little bit drier. And if you're expecting the music going in and you don't realize that it's a play, it can be a little bit of a shock to you.
For sure.
I think my favorite question or my favorite memory from that production. So I was an ensemble member originally in that show.
Okay.
And I found out about 3 weeks prior that I was going to need to learn the lines for Dr. Fogg in that show. There had been some situation involving someone's ability to participate in the show, and I was approached about it. And of course, me being me, I was like, yes, please, I'll take whatever opportunity I can. Yep. I'm on board, whatever I need to do. And so I remember receiving that offer and that opportunity and jumping right in and learning those lines quickly and figuring out what I needed to do and what the blocking was and kind of getting everything under control from there. But that was kind of my first, and I want to say no, I've had some other experiences in the last couple of years where I've had to almost jump in at the last minute, but
we'll get there.
We'll get there. Yeah. But in that particular situation, receiving that notice and having to learn a role rather quickly was very educational.
Did you actually go on for that role?
I did, yeah.
Nice.
Yep, I ended up playing that part for all 4 shows. So that was a good experience. I remember just being in that show with a lot of really great friends and playing opposite of a lot of really great friends. So that was always a good memory for me. But.
So I was Joanna in that show, which was a big deal for me. I was, oh my gosh, I got like this big part. I'm so excited. Every male identifying scene partner I had did not have their lines memorized.
Oh no.
Every single one. And
we didn't play opposite of each other at all.
We did not.
Okay,
we did not.
I could not
You're
remember.
off the hook for that one.
Good.
But I remember I would run the lines with my parents at home because they were, it was monologue after monologue, and I'd run them. And I knew everyone's lines. Like, if I had a scene with someone, I knew my lines, I knew their lines, because that was my cue line. And I remember sitting there with my scene partner at one point. We're in rehearsal, and it was early on.
Yeah.
He didn't know any of his lines. And I'm saying my lines, and I'm, like, kind of feeding him his lines. And our drama teacher was like, you have to improv it. And I'm like, this man is giving me nothing to go off of. What am I supposed to do? But that was crazy. They did eventually get their stuff together, which I appreciated.
Yeah.
It's very hard to improv when it's Old English.
Sure.
It's so hard. And improv is hard anyway for me. And when you have the lines down and you're working opposite someone who just does not know what's going on, it's really hard.
Yep.
But one of my other favorite memories, so I was put on the alcove for a lot of my scenes with, I can't remember the other female character's name, Arabella or something.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. Yeah.
But I was doing a scene with her, and our drama teacher was sitting at the front of the stage. She was supposed to be blocking it, but she was on her phone the whole time. So we just started having our own conversation because she wasn't paying attention. And my scene partner, she looks at me and she goes, my mom says that she's pregnant.
Oh my goodness.
And I was like, what? And we just had this whole conversation. Meanwhile, she's right over there, just oblivious to what's going on. But she actually knew her lines, so we could just sit there and talk. But that was when I found out our drama teacher was pregnant. And another thing that was just, the thing I loved about this show is my mom, like, this is the benefit of having your mom be the costumer. But she made me this amazing custom costume for this role, and I'll post a picture of it, but it was gorgeous. And this was kind of the first, you can kind of count 12th Night, but this was the first real Victorian show that we did. And
it won't be our last.
Oh, it won't. And we'll get to that.
Yes.
But my mom ended up custom making so many of these costumes, and she'd never done anything like this before. So it was really cool to have her involved, and I know she was stressed, but it was just special, like, having that big part and having my mom make my costume. That was, like, such an amazing moment for me. But we have to talk about the slide. And
oh, yes.
I just want to hear your thoughts on the slide, and I want you to describe how we send people down it.
I would be honored to describe the slide. So sometimes theater can be, we prioritize safety. I know that's one thing that we prioritize. And, the situation when it happened, we didn't think anything of it necessarily. And it was fixed by the time, fixed to a point by the time that the show had started. But I remember, so again, this is now the third show that we have had this 2-story set.
Yes.
And of course, in Sweeney Todd, for the spoiler alert for anyone who's not familiar, Sweeney Todd kills people. And
what?
I know. It's wild. But I remember we had built a trap door for Sweeney's victims to fall through from the second story down to the lower level and hidden away. And the original version of that included a slide, but it wasn't like a slide that had been built with the purpose and intent of sliding down from the second story. It was a yellow jungle gym, like buy for your backyard kind of slide. And because of the height of the platform, the slide itself it wasn't quite at a 90-degree angle, but it was probably like a 70-degree angle when it first went up. And I just remember them discussing what we were going to do and how we were going to make that moment happen. And I don't remember if we actually... I know it was adjusted and it was safe by the end of the day, but that original version, seeing it up, there was no way.
Well, and you're missing a key element here.
Oh, okay.
Which is, there was this guy in the drama department who was on the larger side. He was just really tall.
Oh, yes. Uh-huh.
And her solution to making this safe was sticking him under the platform.
Oh, that's right.
And just having him catch people.
Yes.
That were flying down this slide.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yep. I forgot about that.
That was his job, that show.
Mm-hmm.
He was the catcher.
He did help catch people. He slid down.
I don't think half the time they didn't even touch the slide, really. They just fell through the platform.
Hey, knock on wood. We don't have any, but here at our with our recording setup, but nobody got hurt in that instance. Yep. And
look, we have our own Sweeney Todd stories. But we'll get there.
Yes, yeah, we live to tell the tale.
But
yes,
barely.
Oh gosh, was there anything else that you had from Sweeney Todd?
I have one more.
Okay.
Which this was just a funny moment, but my parents were sitting in the audience. My dad loves to tell this story where my mom started getting up. He's like, "Where are you going?" And she goes, "Sweeney Todd ripped his pants."
Oh my gosh.
Run back and fix his pants.
Mm-hmm.
It happens.
She's always ready to go at a moment's notice.
Always.
It's one of the many things we really love about her. Yes. Yep. Always ready. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So, I mean, that was fall of your sophomore year, my junior year. And then, we ended up finishing that year out with How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. And Miranda, I can say definitively as your friend that I know that this is probably one of your least favorite musicals ever written on the face of the earth. You want to tell us why?
It's so misogynistic. Like, I just despise this show. Now, I think for a while I've been saying this. I think you could tell an interesting message if you were to get permission to gender swap it. Mm-hmm. And you could kind of do a commentary on the time.
Yeah.
But this show is rough. It's rough. There's a couple songs. One's called A Secretary's Not a Toy, which is all the men singing about how you're not supposed to play with the secretaries. You're supposed to leave them alone. But the lyrics, just look it up. They're questionable at best. And there is a song, Happy to Keep His Dinner Warm. And the main couple, what is his name? Finch?
Finch, yep.
Finch and Rosemary.
Yes,
Finch sucks. He is not a good partner at all. And Rosemary is like fully in her right to be like, no, I don't want this guy. And then there's a whole song about, hey, he's going to make a lot of money. Don't turn down the prince. Like, go get him. And then they get together. And it's infuriating. The messages are horrible. There are some good songs, but there are so many show choices out there. Just let this one die, please.
Yeah. It is. It's a complicated show, too. There's a lot of moving parts. And it just, in general, it is. You're 100% right. It's very misogynistic. And it's a very, just like Anything Goes, is a very... it's a timely piece, and its time was not really, late 2000 teens, somewhere in there, early 2000 teens. But it's just a very it came from a different time and a different era, and
It was on Broadway at the time, too,
It
right?
was.
There was a revival.
Yeah, there was. And
Yeah.
I don't know if there were any adaptations to that production or not, but it definitely is a complicated musical, to put it simply, to put it plainly. It's just very, very complicated.
But I have a lot of stories from this show.
So do I.
Oh, gosh. Where do we start?
You want to go ahead and just start with yours?
Yeah. So the biggest one is the pit. We did not have a pianist. So
that's right.
For a lot of our run-throughs, and I do have video of this that I'm probably not going to share because copyright, but we were doing run-throughs. We were like 4 days before opening or something.
Yeah.
4, maybe 3. And someone would be singing, and it would sound like they were singing a cappella. And then you would hear random brass, like trumpet, tuba. There's a lot of tuba.
Yes.
No piano. It was rough. It was so rough. And then a few days before opening, I remember we finally got a pianist. And we all sat there, and we were singing with the pianist, and we were like, oh, thank God, we have a show. But it was so rough. And I remember watching part of the run through, and I was like, we can't put this on stage.
Right.
There's no way. So that was one of the biggest things. Another thing was she cut the end of Act 1 completely. So this was like the big moment of like the villain is singing about how like they're going to return, and Rosemary's singing about how she doesn't know what to do with her relationship, and Finch is singing about whatever his arc was, getting to the top or whatever. Yep. It wasn't working, so what do? We just cut it. The end of Act 1. I don't remember how Act 1 ended with us cutting it.
I feel like it wasn't a clean cut of the song, but I feel like there was some trimming. There was definitely some trimming going on at the end of that act, because there was just, it was not working.
It was rough.
It was not working.
And our t-shirts had the incorrect show title on them.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. They put the wrong title on the shirts, which I remember getting them, and it was just like, what do we do? Because everything was delayed, basically. So by the time we got our shirts, we didn't have time to redo them. And everyone was just like, it doesn't matter. I'm like, it's not the title of the show. It's the wrong title.
Oh, my gosh.
And just in general, the set, like...
Oh, my favorite thing about that set, if you don't mind me jumping in.
Oh, please.
I'm sure you're going to get there, but I can't talk about the show and not talk about the best thing about the set. So we had elevators. The show takes place in a business or an office, building, and we had these really cool elevators, and one of them was a real elevator, and the other one was a painted-on elevator right next to each other. And I'll never forget, based off the way, and again, this was our 2-story set, the last use of the 2-story set, because of the placement of the escape stairs on the back of the set, the elevators that actually opened could not line up with each other. So if you got in on the left side on the bottom, you'd go through the escape stairs and you'd come out on the right side on the top. And I will never forget that realization, and, just the ultimate decision of, it's going to happen. No one's really going to notice. They're just going to think it's really cool that the elevators work. And, I've never seen an elevator like that in any office building that I've been in, but the thought of it was really cool, and I thought it looked really good to some extent at the end of the day, and we had working elevators, but they were sideway elevators.
There was a show we did not have a working elevator. Do you remember that? I'm pretty sure the doors got caught, and then we had to put an out of order sign on it.
Oh, that's right. Yes. Yep.
And weren't there people behind there just pulling the doors open every time?
Yep. They were on, it was like a string system.
Yes.
Yep.
So one of my favorite memories about the set was the painting was not done.
Oh,
and they continued to paint throughout the show days, like the performances. So every performance, our set got a little more painted.
Oh, yes. Yep.
And the other thing was that I found interesting. I've gone back to our high school since then. Our former music director runs the program now. She asked me to help. I've helped a couple times. And the students, if you go do a tech rehearsal past 8 p.m., parents complain. They will not have it. So she really can't go past 8 p.m. For How to Succeed in particular and other shows, we went past 11 p.m.
Oh, yes.
So we were there. We started our rehearsal at like 3 p.m. and went till 11.
Yes.
Which is crazy to think about now because we usually have 4-hour max tech rehearsals. So we were doing like 7-8 hour rehearsals.
Right after an 8-hour school day.
And we still didn't have the show done. But we would do all of that and then get home at like midnight and then turn around and get up at 6 a.m. to get ready for school.
We did.
Which is crazy. I mean, granted, I'm a firm believer that 8 p.m. probably is a good cutoff for all intents and purposes. That's probably good. But yeah, I remember telling our former music director when she was talking about that. I was like, we used to go till 11 o'clock. And she was like, oh, I remember. You can't do that anymore.
Not anymore. Yeah.
But what was it like being on the alcove for the entire show?
Oh my gosh. I'm so glad you asked. You asked. I like to refer to How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying as my final foray in acting. And like over the years, I've had other opportunities where I've been on stage, which again, we'll get to in future episodes. But How to Succeed in Business, I refer to in that sense because the cast list, I auditioned like I had done every year prior. And I was very fortunate and very excited about the part that I'd gotten, but I was cast as the book voice. And the book voice is typically a role that is in professional settings and probably in amateur and regional productions. It's typically recorded ahead of time and it's played as a recording over the house. And I remember getting cast as the book voice and I remember going home and I was super excited about it. I was like, all these great people have been the book voice prior. Famous newscasters have been the book voice. I was super thrilled about that. But it wasn't too long into the process that I realized that my book voice was going to be much different. I was told that the book voice was actually going to be a character in itself. I was going to be positioned at a desk in the alcove of the theater, and I would be on stage the entire show. From the very beginning. I think I had the first line in the show, and I would deliver my lines from the front of the stage. And, essentially my character was the author of the book, telling the story while the story was happening, or setting up the story as it was happening and working on his book. And it was a wild experience. Of course, it was like a partial view of the stage, so I could only really see half of the show. I remember one of those final nights of tech. People were still forgetting their lines, and that same vocal director that you were just talking about, I remember her walking off the stage, and I also, in the midst of doing a lot of other things, had my script with me, and I had very dense and very meaty like monologues that I was delivering in that role.
Right.
So I had my script with me just in case I needed it. And I was very concerned that she never got mad at me. Just really great individual to work with. But I was very concerned that she was going to walk past me and be really upset that I had my script on stage. And I will never forget her walking past me to go back out into the theater and seeing that I had my libretto with me and her saying, I'm actually really glad that you have your libretto because if anyone forgets their lines, I'm going to need you to chime in as the book voice and just deliver the lines. And fortunately, during the actual show, that never needed to happen. The one thing that did almost happen, though, I remember on a night of tech, we had a sound cue that was a phone ringing. And I remember us waiting for the phone to ring, and the phone wouldn't ring, and we kept waiting and waiting, and all of a sudden I looked up and just said, the phone rang. And I remember everyone that was in the theater at the time just breaking and just losing their minds over that comment. And I'm like, okay, well, great. I'm glad it landed well. And this is something that I could do in case of an emergency. So I refer to this show as my last foray in acting because of the fact that I realized that I was the only solo speaking part in a musical. I did not sing at all. I did not, I had nothing else going on in a traditional sense. I would have just been delivering these lines off stage. So
right.
I was like, you know what? Okay. I'm not going to count myself out from ever acting again, but like maybe this is a sign that I need to kind of see what else is out there in the theater and is there something else that I might be more interested in doing or other opportunities that I want to explore?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, How to Succeed was one of those shows that I feel like definitely learned a lot, and it was one of those shows that I can say that I'm happy that I did, but it definitely was kind of a game changer for me in the way that I saw theater and opportunities in theater. And,
Right.
you know, we'll talk about this more, but like, you know, where, you know, people sometimes don't see with theater that there are opportunities outside of just acting, and exploring those opportunities, you may find a place that's a better fit for you or a better opportunity for you to learn and use your own skills that you already have. So I kind of count that show as that opportunity to be an eye-opening experience for me. So yeah, I really have a love-hate relationship with that show. I'm not a big fan of the show itself, but the opportunities it gave me and the experience was a really important one for my theater career.
The show was rough.
Yeah.
I'll say.
I do catch myself singing that show every once in a while. Just the songs.
I know,
just
you were
stick in your
singing
head.
it earlier today.
I was. I mean, who doesn't love like a coffee break or, it's the songs are catchy, but gosh, is that story hard to process
It's a
sometimes.
rough one.
It can be. That is so true. So true. Well, I guess we can get to my senior year at this point.
James and the Giant Peach.
Victorian. Yeah.
Set in New York in the 20s. What, 20s or 40s?
I believe it was the 40s because the Empire State Building had already been built. I just talked about that transition that I had with How to Succeed in Business. So I went into senior year. I was president of the Thespian Society, which I was super excited about. I, really was looking forward to growing and encouraging more people to join the program and be active in the theater department. I saw what benefits it brought me, and I knew that it could be a good catch-all place for people who were trying to try out new things and find new experiences. So, I switched over into a more technical side of things and a more business aspect of it all. So I remember with James and the Giant Peach, that show in particular, I was the assistant director for. And I remember just hearing that was the show we were doing, not really being familiar with the source material. I think I'm like one of 3 people who's never seen that movie ever. So I remember watching it for the first time and just being really confused by it, but like kind of excited for the experience and seeing how we were going to be able to tell the story.
Yeah.
And I know there's something that you want to bring up because it's something I also want to bring up in reference to the set.
Go for it.
So we had... I've come over the years to really love and be passionate about scene design and what a scene looks like and how, as a director, you can paint a really vivid picture with the set items and the props that you choose to put on stage in addition to your performers. And I'll never forget, we had a giant peach set. I mean, it was a 2-story peach that was on a revolve, and it was one of the coolest things that I had ever seen in my life. And I will never forget, the first time that the peach, so like the front of it was the peach facade, but when you spin it around, you could see the inside of the peach, and it was beautifully designed and looked really, really great. And I remember we put tea lights on the inside, so when there was a blackout and the peach opened up, all you saw were the tea lights glowing, which was it was stunning. But the one thing that I will never forget about that set in particular was... the peach, its final placement was great. However, it was not placed behind the mid-stage curtain. So essentially, if you ever wanted to hide the peach, you had to close the main stage curtain and hope that nobody was going to see it until it was needed. And it brought a lot of limitations to that set. But it was a really good story. I was very proud of that experience and that opportunity and like helping to block and tell that story and, encourage people to really find their characters. That was kind of like my first foray into seeing what that opportunity was like. And it was a really, really neat experience. So
were you assistant director or stage?
Yes, I was assistant director for that show. So I did a lot of the blocking and supporting kind of the process of that show, which I really loved. And also like figuring out, how we can move people effectively around a space and tell that story. And I remember one of the prop items that I had to help build because, in high school theater, you do everything.
Yep, you sure do.
Help out however you can. And I remember building in drama class one of the prop items, and it was the seagulls. Do you remember the seagulls?
I still have one.
Do you?
Yeah,
oh my gosh, I didn't realize you still had one. Yeah, so the seagulls were paper mache. And they looked nothing like seagulls at all. They were like balloon-shaped seagulls, essentially birds, and they were balloon shaped, and we had like 8 or 9 of them, and they hung on strings on sticks, and I will never forget, or it was like PVC pipe.
Yeah.
That people would walk around the stage, and I was so proud of those items. They were completely ridiculous and like not very practical for what was going on. But
and sometimes your seagull would just fall off the
Yes.
thing.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that happened all the time. But yeah, I'll never forget those seagulls. Those were so funny. Yeah, James and the Giant Peach, and
Yeah.
and the other thing that I remember from that show, there's a moment towards the end of the show where the peach flies and falls out of the sky and lands on top of the Empire State Building. And I remember us trying to troubleshoot and figure out how we were going to display that and explain that.
Right.
And I remember talking to the director at the time and saying, hey, what we could do is they sell model versions of the Empire State Building. And during that moment, James is delivering a monologue at the front of the stage. And I was like, what if we have a small, like, hand-sized, like, ball-shaped peach that could, we could place on top of this small, like, less than a foot tall model of the Empire State Building. And it was so like perfect and worked really well for the timing of the show and this, the setting of it all. But I was really proud of that experience and really happy with the way that show turned out at the end of the day. But I do have to ask you about the Victorian clothing. If you haven't noticed, we've said that word a lot in this recap. Victorian clothing was a popular item in high school. Tell me about that.
I just remember my mom telling me, yeah, she wants Victorian. Mm-hmm. And we were just having this discussion of like, it's set in the 40s. Yeah. It doesn't make sense. I will say what she was able to accomplish with the insects was great.
Yes.
But that was definitely the beginning of the end in terms of the costuming design because it was just so not appropriate for that show that we started to realize, oh, she's just really attached to this like one genre of costume. Not to mention it's almost the hardest costume to do. Victorian's very difficult, costs a lot of money. So that was definitely interesting. And in terms of the set with the peach not being able to fit past the mid-stage, one of my favorite parts of that story that you left out was just our drama teacher's reaction when she discovered that she couldn't shut the mid. She was so pissed. I'm like, girl, this is why you have to measure. Like,
one of the, it's that, and also just, it was such a huge undertaking. And like, this was the first time in 3 years that we didn't have that 2-story, beautiful but monstrosity of a set upstage. And like trying to figure out how to adapt to that amount of space was a trial in itself.
100%.
Yeah, so I can understand the frustrations to some extent of like trying to figure out where to place this giant peach and not even thinking about all that extra room that you'd have. It's just unbelievable. I
want to touch briefly on Prince Charmless before we go into Footloose.
Sure.
Well, and before Footloose, I mean, we were troublemakers and we have a story to tell there as well.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. We had to go through the whole timeline.
Yeah, but which one do you want to hit first, Charmless or the story? Sure.
So, it's technically my first show directing.
Yeah.
And it was a class production. And, I mean, there was a lot of crazy stuff with it. Overall, it went pretty well. You ended up in the show.
I did. After I had already drew the line on acting, I know. I came back.
You were always like, whatever needs to get done.
Yes.
And that's our high school experience in a nutshell, right? We were like, whatever.
That's quite the sign.
Oh my gosh. Half of them have fallen. It's cursed. But that was our experience in a nutshell, was whatever needs to get done is going to get done.
For sure, yeah.
And that's how we ended up like doing this whole thing. But for Prince Charmless, one of my favorite memories looking back on it is I was like, is everyone in places? Yeah, we're in places. Okay, we're going to black. We go to black. the person who starts the first scene was not even in their costume yet. So I don't bring the lights up. I'm like, no, I'll be out in like 2 minutes. Be fine. We were in that blackout for 5 to 10 business days. It was so long. We were just sitting there in the darkness, waiting for this person to put on their costume. But I also remember our drama teacher, she gave me flowers, like, congrats, director, congrats on your debut. And obviously we, you know this, and we'll get into it more, like, her and I did not have a good relationship by the end. But that was one of those things where, like, I wanted her approval so badly. So, like, getting those flowers and, like, the congrats, director, I was like, yes, I did it. So that was definitely a big moment for me.
Yeah.
Do you have any memories from Prince Charmless?
The only thing I remember from Prince Charmless, it was, if I remember correctly, I didn't know I was doing that role until like the last minute, which is kind of a theme for me with some of these shows.
Yes.
I learned my lines very, very quickly, and it, I remember being on stage and like I definitely just skipped like a third of a page of lines. I just like jumped ahead. And like, fortunately, this is not very common. It was a freshman intro to theater class that I was doing this show with. And I just remember jumping ahead with the lines and they picked up on it and kind of kept moving. But I was like, I
don't know what I'm doing.
It was gone. I don't know what my character's name is. I don't know what the experience is. I don't even know where I am right now. But like, I just will never forget just having that brief moment of panic and just jumping back in with whatever line I knew next. And we made it work. It work.
Happened.
It did happen. It did.
It was something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for getting snarky with us. We'll see you later.
See you next time.